What we're going to cover right now is how to modify the file or the boss that we just created. So let's say we have a sketch and the dimensions that we have are all incorrect. So we can select on the sketch, we can right click on it, and you'll notice that we can always edit. So let's click on that, and it's going to allow us to come in and edit the sketch. And we know it was on the front plane, and we don't want to deal with it as it's sort of sitting there in a weird way. And we can zoom in and out as we need, and we're going to modify the dimensions. But first, everything I did here at first was done in Imperial. And I want to do everything in metric because I'm a Canadian. So what we can do is we can always come up here to this hamburger or document menu. There's 3 lines here, and you can come in and look at this. You'll see Workspace Units. And the units can be pretty handy, obviously, if you want to be in inch or millimeter and display decimals and all that sort of stuff. We're just going to change this over to millimeter, and we're going to say that's okay. And you notice that it shot us outside of the sketch again. And that can be a little frustrating, but once in a while you kind of just have to deal with things. So we're going to right click on it. We're going to hit edit. And now we can see that we have these dimensions here. The dimension for the diameter of this hole here is, you can see from earlier before, we put in 0.25 inches, and it's creating a dimension, or you can see in the dialog here that it says 0.25 inches because that is what we put in. But when we select outside of it, that you'll see that it converts it to millimeters. So let's also remember that if you don't know what units that you're in, but you can always add, say, 0.25 mm for millimeters or 0.25 in for inches and feet, and etc, etc, etc. But we're not going to concern ourselves about this. We're just going to make sure that we're in the units that we want. Now the diameter of this hole is 2.438 millimeters, which is very close to a number 43 drill. And you'll notice that it shrunk down a huge amount. So this was obviously way too big. Now this diameter here, or the offset that I had, was 9 millimeters. So now we have that set up. And the distance between these 2 holes I had was 11.624. Now I can, because I'm already in metric, I don't have to add millimeters to it. It's automatically assuming that I'm doing millimeters. Now I was just out of habit is typing in mm. Maybe a good or a bad habit, it all depends. If you're always working in the same units, then it's not that big of a deal. But at that point, we have that all set up. We're gonna hit OK, and you can see that the model will have modified itself to be what we want, but obviously it's way too wide. So again, we need to modify the extrusion width. Now, there's a few things you can do. Is that you can right click on it and hit edit like we did before, or you can double click on it and you'll notice that it brings everything up so that you can edit it. Now what I wanted this to be was 30 millimeters. So now that we've got this modified, we have it set up so that we have the holes all drilled all the way through. The next thing that we're going to cover here is the next sketch, which is on the right plane. So let's show the right plane again, and you can see that it's at a different angle. And I've been zooming in and out and kind of not getting what I want. You can always hit the F key, and the F key will zoom out to bring everything into the screen, including the right plane. So we're going to draw on the right plane, and we're going to create a couple of hexes so that we have something that we can push the tool through. So let's go sketch. And if I haven't selected a plane, it'll ask me to select a plane or a face. So we're going to select the right plane, and you can select it here on the feature tree, or you can also select it right in the workspace. So there are a few different ways that we can draw the hexes. One of the easiest ways to start out is, again, I like to have some reference geometry. So I'm going to click on line. Now you'll remember before that I drew the line out in the middle of space, and I also afterwards I hit the construction geometry. But here's something that's kind of neat, is that I can hit construction and line at the same time, and it will allow me to draw a construction line straight off, and I don't have to come in and do any more of that. So there are some little tricks to go with the line tool. There's click and drag, and then there's click, move the mouse, and then drop the next line. So I'm going to show you the difference between the two. Now if I click and hold the left mouse button when I'm making a line, and I come out and I release the mouse button, it'll drop that last point, and you'll notice that it is a single line out in the middle of space on its own. Now if I click and release the mouse button, and then I go to the next spot, and I click it again and release, it will allow me to make another line immediately afterwards. And if you don't want this line anymore, all you have to do is hit the escape key, and that will get you out of the command that you're currently at and leave everything that you've laid down from before. So in this case, we don't need these lines, but that is a couple things that you want to keep in mind when you're drawing. So I'm going to box select those, then I'm going to hit delete, and it'll get rid of those guys. So like before, I want this constrained to that origin. So I'm going to click on that line. I'm going to click on the origin, and then I'm going to select the midpoint. and that will bring it down to exactly where I want it to be. So we've got that set up, and now there's a couple different ways we can deal with drawing that hex area. Is that we can come in and we can draw out standard lines. And one thing here is another neat little thing about lines is that you'll notice that this highlighted to the origin. So I was kind of off the side of the origin, and it goes, hey, wait, you probably want that to be related to that. So it'll make sure that that line is always horizontal to the origin, or that point is horizontal to the origin. So I can click down and I can drag out the other line, and I'll just sketch this out. This is not the way I would normally do this, but I can sketch this. Now you'll notice that I'm not getting that inference that I did before like I did from the origin. So without clicking down, I can go over to that one point, and I don't want to end it there, but when I pull away, you'll notice that there's kind of an elastic band line or a reference line that grabs it and says, hey, maybe you want to have that reference there, that it's horizontal to that line, which I do. Then I'm going to click there, and then I'm going to close everything off. And once I do that, you'll notice that it escapes out of the line command, and we have this semi-hex out there, and we have to work out the dimensions of the angle here and make sure that everything's related. And this can be a bit of a pain in the butt as far as making sure that everything is related to each other. So that's one way you can sketch it out. Then you can say take this line and make them equal. Then you can start dimensioning things out and making sure everything's good. But again, that is a bit of an arduous way to go about doing it. When you deal with CAD day in and day out, the least amount of mouse clicks you can make is sort of like the way you can win. It's kind of like a game of golf. So we're going to delete those guys out. Now I'm going to show you another cool feature up here is an inscribe polygon. So what it ends up doing is that it will create a circle based off of where I'm putting it on that edge, and it will make a polygon on the outside of that. And you can see I can rotate it around. I'm just going to kind of rough estimate about how big I want this thing to be. And then I'm going to click it down. Now you'll notice that there's the 6 right in this area here. And when I move the mouse around, it changes how many faces are on the polygon. So in this case, if I move away, it increases. If I move in towards the line, it creates less. So we can go right down to 3. We want 6, and I'm going to click it down. And now you'll notice that it created a polygon that we have that's everything basically that we need for some of the geometry. I'm going to create a second one right there at that point. I'm going to come out and drag it, and it's already at 6, so I'm just going to click again. Now these aren't in the right orientation, they're kind of floppy, and it's not necessarily in the area I want. So first thing that we need to do is that we need to take that circle, and we want them to be equal. That way we have the same outside diameter of this polygon, or outside edges or faces. The next thing that I want to do is I want to have these things so that they're at the same orientation. So I can say select that one line there, and I want to make it horizontal. Now you can hit the H key as well. So alternately, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to grab this line here, and I'm going to hit the H key, and you'll notice that it does exactly the same thing. And these things are both the same outside diameter now. The next thing I need to do is get out the diameter that I actually want these to be. Now in this case, I want it to be 12 millimeters. So I can dimension from that line to this line and say 12 millimeters. I can also dimension the diameter of that circle, but in this case, this will be fine. So we're going to say 12 millimeters, and we've got that all set up. But this isn't exactly what I want. I want to zoom in a little bit. I don't need some of these lines to be here anymore, and they're going to kind of get in the way. There are a bunch of ways that you can still extrude everything, but in this case, let's just clean this up. Now I don't need that line, so I can select that line. Then I can select the next line. We're going to get rid of these guys here because they're sort of extra redundant information. And I'm going to get rid of this line and this line. And it's not necessarily going to make sense right away, but let's just do that. So let's delete those out. And now what I can do is I can take that point, and I can make them coincident. Or I can hit the I key. Now this ended up kind of doing some funky stuff and getting rid of one of these lines of mine, which is quite odd. So what we're going to do is we're going to try a different way of extending a line out. Now what I'm doing here is I'm just hitting Control Z or Command Z to back out of the commands that I had. We've got another command. Now sometimes these things don't work for you properly the first time, and there's always multiple ways to do any one task, and this is a perfect example. When I tried to make those coincident, it didn't work. In this case, we have a trim tool, but we also have an extend tool. So we're going to hit the extend tool, we're going to click on that line, and we're going to mouse it over to this line here. And it zapped everything over exactly where I wanted it to be and didn't do some funky stuff with this line here. So again, what we're going to do is we're going to click on that line, come over here, we're going to click on that line, And you'll notice that all of this here now is all the sketches black, exactly what we want it to be. The next thing that we're going to end up doing here is extrude this guy out, and we'll add some holes to this afterwards. So again, we're going to come up and we'll put this into a view that will give us a better idea of what is exactly going on. We're going to extrude it out, and the distance that we want to extrude this out is 24 millimeters. In this case, 25 is almost there, so we want it 24. We'll click on that, but you'll notice that it's not symmetrical. So again, we're going to come in here, get the drop down, and we're going to hit symmetric. Now there's a few things that you can do with solids. In this case is now we have two potential solids inside of here. Now you can make a new part. It'll make a separate part, a separate color. And you'll notice that it just changed to blue now that I selected on new. If you're making multiple parts in a part library or static parts that don't move against each other, this is a great way to go about doing it. In this case, we want to add it. But we could also use that sketch to remove or to get rid of some of this geometry. We can also use intersect. Now this is something that you'll have to look up. Right now, this is just sort of the quick and dirty, get in there and make something an Onshape course to kind of get you functional. But I ask you to basically go in and start playing with a lot of these, because intersect and stuff, it's amazing what you can do. Now you can also create surfaces, but again, this is not what this course is all about. We're just gonna do an add. We're going to do it symmetric at 24 millimeters, and we're going to hit OK. And it created that geometry, so let's get rid of that right plane. And now you can see that we have the foundation tread or piece that we need for the wristband tool or the belt. And it's a great way to get things started. In the next lesson, what we're going to start covering is creating some holes in this and making everything nice and pretty.